All right, folks, welcome. Get your blue light blocking glasses on and get your feet on your grounding mat. Climb out of your cold plunges because it's time for another DNA Company webinar. And we got a really good topic tonight. We're going to be talking about diet and how you can use your DNA to actually tailor your diet to your genes to hopefully get the best case scenario result. It's an important topic to cover, I think, because we live in this divisive world now with everything, right? Everything has a dogma, everything is quite divisive. It's almost like talking about religions when we start talking about keto versus paleo versus plant-based versus animal-based, etc. I think that your genes are a really good indicator as to where on that kind of dietary spectrum you belong. At a baseline, sapiens are meant to eat plants and animals. We're hunters, gatherers, and we're also meant to avoid poisonous things to the best of our ability. I think that these waters have become a little bit muddy because there's more toxins in our diet than there ever was before. It's hard to know, where do I belong on that Homo sapien eating spectrum? More plants, no plants at all, nothing but meat, very little meat. How do we decide these things, where we belong on this spectrum? In my view, it's a personalization question, and that's why we talk a lot about the genes and their role there. Here tonight to break down such a topic is the jacked and powerful Felicia Bruno. Felicia, why don't you say hi to everybody?
Hi, I'm so glad to be here and I'm so excited to talk about this topic. I wish back in the day when I was competing, I wish I had my DNA so I knew exactly what to eat because it was a process for me. And it was a long process of, do I eat carbs? How many carbs do I eat? I mean, it was a free for all. Now I did it and I obtained it, but I bet I could have gotten there a whole lot quicker if I'd have known. Because now that I know, my life has changed. I mean, my diet has changed, the food that I eat has changed, and how my body reacts to it has changed. So I'm really excited to dive in tonight and discuss this along with how it fits into working out and what food does for us, and one of my favorite topics. So let's do it.
Yeah, ditto. It's one of my favorite topics too. And I think that bodybuilding is really biohacking. It's just towards a specific goal. Like if you really want to know how to get more muscle or how to dial down your body fat percentages, bodybuilding is an entire sport about that. Like it is the sport, you know what I mean? So it's not separate. There's other sports that have weight classes and different things, sure. But when it comes to like competitive physique, you're talking about the capacity to put muscle on and then dial on your body fat, dial it down. So nobody knows more about that kind of stuff than bodybuilders, and I'm very grateful to have you on our team because you're able to pair it with functional genomics and the things that we talk about. So it's a great combo. I think functional genomics really comes in as well when it comes to the longevity of what your diet actually is, because bodybuilders, you guys operate in seasons, and it's like there's preseason and then there's a competition and you got to cut your water weight and do these various things. It's a different animal entirely than someone who's really just trying to maintain a healthy body fat percentage and a little bit less extreme, but trying to just live a long time and look and feel good as well while they're at it.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely, yeah, we a bulking phase and a leaning out phase. And during that, it's building muscle and it's all aesthetics. The whole thing is aesthetics. So it's definitely dialed into what exactly you put in your body, how your body reacts to that certain thing. And food is so key. And what we eat affects every little thing. And it just has now that I'm not competing, I can eat something and I can tell the difference. I mean, when you're keyed in, you can tell exactly what's going on. But your DNA helps tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the spirit of goal setting and trying to achieve different things, we do have a poll that we put up there. So if you haven't had a chance, please go ahead and fill that out just to help kind of steer us in what we're working with so that we know, what you guys are trying to achieve with this. Commonly, I mean, we see a lot of patients, Felicia and myself, and I would say there's three primary goals that we see all the time, being either weight loss, that's arguably number one, The second nutrition goal that we see a lot would be just the reduction of inflammation. You know, people have a lot of inflammatory issues these days. And I think that the diet is certainly one of those sources of inflammation for a lot of people. And then the third one would, of course, be muscle building. You know, we need to have a good amount of muscle mass as we age in order to maintain a certain level of life, a certain quality of life. You know, posture and circulation and all these things matter. So we'll talk a little bit about this tonight through the lens of those three goals. If we do have that poll up, though, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and there we go, illuminating that for us. Okay. Let's dive into this a little bit. So the first question that we asked is, what type of nutrition plan are you currently following? And about 20% of you said standard diet, no specific plan. That's just fine. About 16% of you are doing the low carb thing. So you guys are on a ketogenic or a low carb diet. I would loop, you know, animal-based carnivorous into that category as well. Interestingly, exactly 16% as well are doing a vegetarian or a vegan diet, plant-based. 25% doing a Mediterranean diet, and there's a lot of nuances to the Mediterranean diet and how that goes. And then about 23% are in that other category. I would honestly have to place myself in that other category as well, because I don't have a name for what I'm currently doing. You know what I mean? I kind of took a paleo diet and then I got my genes and I messed with it. And then I messed with it again for my body composition goals. And then I messed with it again for sleep. I messed with it again for performance. So I don't have a name. I'm just going to call what I'm doing the Justin Harris diet. What about you, Felicia? Do you have like something that would fall into one of those categories, or are you kind of in an other category?
You know, I used to be on a very strict, it was a bodybuilding diet. But since I'm past that, you know, and another thing is I'm postmenopausal. So my diets have looked very different very quickly. So when I was competing, it was one way. And then when I was menopause, I was gaining weight a little bit differently. So then my diet changed. And now that it's postmenopausal, I even change it even more. You know, as far as my carb intake and how I look at fruits and vegetables are totally different because, you know, I never even looked at fruits way back in the day. So yeah, it is totally changed. And I'm really curious, like when other people say other, what do they mean? Are they talking like maybe a carnivore diet or, um, you know, like a fasting diet? I'm kind of curious to see what people are saying.
Yeah, by all means, put that in the chat because I think that a lot of us end up at this kind of hybrid diet that doesn't necessarily fit into a specific category. And who needs a category anyways, right? This is all about
Right?
you. So
Absolutely.
yeah, we'll maybe do away with categories one day, and it'll just be about what works for you. I think that's the goal. Um, so the second question that we asked was, what is your primary goal for your nutrition plan? 13% of you said weight loss. Fair enough. 32% of you said reducing inflammation. And that's really interesting because the weight loss and inflammation are really part of the same conversation. A lot of people, I think they're just inflamed, you know, and it makes your body kind of store water and different things as well. So that's a really good goal. Only 9% of you are trying to build muscle. Well, you're going to be disappointed because we're going to talk about that a fair amount today, possibly, maybe. We'll see. And wow, 46%, almost half of you are just generally eating for health, well-being, longevity. I love it. Really good call.
Yeah.
Okay, question number 3. Are you currently taking any dietary supplements? And a whopping 82% of you said yes, regularly. I am as well. 11% said occasionally. So you're kind of cycling on and off, or you're throwing things in certain days and taking days off. That's just fine. 5% said no, not at all. And 2% of you are considering it. So hopefully we can get a little bit of info your way today as well. Okay, so the final question we asked was, have you ever used your genetic information to guide you and your nutrition or supplement choices? So 38% of you said yes, and your current diet is completely incorporating that. 14% of you said yes, but you're not currently utilizing that. 39 said no, but you're interested. That's great. We'll talk about it a lot tonight. And 9% said no, and you haven't considered it. So maybe we can tip the scales on you today as well. So very interesting. You guys are following a lot of different kind of diets and dabbling and trying a lot of different things. This really is a process. You know, you're trying to experiment with these various diets, and I did the same thing. I'm sure you did as well, Felicia. Um, how long did it take for you to get to that point where you felt like really good about the diet that you have?
After competing,
Yeah,
okay, after competing, it took me a good year and a half. I mean, it was just a yeah, what do I do? What do I do now? And I had been eating one certain way for so long that I wanted to just be normal, you
yeah.
know. When I started incorporating foods back into my diet, um, my body reacted very, very differently. And I will note that, you know, I was eating so clean, which I still have, I'm back to eating clean. But when I strayed a little bit and started eating some processed foods, I'm not talking donuts or anything. I'm talking maybe like some crackers, like some box crackers. They were a different kind of carb. My body reacted differently to them. And noted, I did have some inflammation come in, which I was like, what? You know, so it was a whole learning curve for me, a whole learning process of, and still is, of what food does to the body and inflammation and how that in return um, messes with your workouts. How do you build muscle with inflammation when you hurt all the time? And so it's been a big learning curve for me. But food, yes, it has changed dramatically. Back to your question. And again, right? We said it's a journey because you do one thing for one time and you think, okay, I'm doing good, and then it's working until it doesn't work. And then you know, you go off on a different path and you're trying something else until you don't, you know, you're just like most women my age, past 50, are just going, I give up. I give up. I've tried this. The weight loss doesn't go around I can't lose the weight around my belly. I'm fatigued. The list is endless. I'm sure it is with guys too, that you see. And so yeah, just learning my genes has really, really, my DNA has really helped me know how I metabolize and how I process foods.
Yeah, I agree. I had the same overall journey as far as messing with my diet a whole bunch. Um, is my volume okay? Someone in the comments mentioned that there's a bit of an echo there.
I hear you fine, but
Okay, if everybody can hear me fine, I'll keep on.
Susan says,
I don't think it's you, Justin. Let's have Julius take a look at stuff on the back end real quick. Go ahead and keep going. You're doing fine.
All right, I'll keep on rambling then. So yeah, I mean, you know, with our DNA 360, there's a lot of little components that can really help, right? So we talk about macronutrients, we talk about gut microbiome status as far as detoxification. We talk about insulin response, which is a huge factor when it comes to the capacity to keep lean tissue on without going overboard with body fat percentages, because dysregulation there is really a problem. And then we talk about micronutrients, right? We talk about zinc, we talk about vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin A. So there's a lot of little personalization techniques that I use, and I'm sure you do as well, Felicia. When it comes to this macronutrient thing, the first thing I usually look at myself is that TCF7L2, the insulin gene. The main reason I do that is because if that gene is dysregulated, everything is going to be a little bit more difficult to dial in, right? Because if it's dysregulated, too much of any given macronutrient can result in an insulin spike. And insulin is like a storage hormone, so it can kind of signal things to store in your tissue, right? So let's say, for example, you're dysregulated for TCF7L2, and then you jumped on a really high fat ketogenic diet, for example. You might be the person who that doesn't work as well for. You know, like your neighbor may have got a really good result from that, but you go and do the butter coffee and adding everything, avocados and MCTs to every meal that you do, it might be too much for your metabolism. And that's mainly because you can, in fact, get an insulin spike from too much of any given macronutrient if you're dysregulated genetically. So I'll share one of my little things that I do for that is that if someone's dysregulated for TCF7L2, that'll be in your diet report as well as your cardiovascular report, is I'll use some sort of a blood glucose disposal agent with them. Like I'll use apple cider vinegar or a Ceylon cinnamon. Berberine is a great ingredient. And it can help to kind of deal with that additional glucose problem that a lot of these people run into. Where do you start, Felicia, when it comes to, like, let's say you have a client, they come at you and they have some sort of an issue. They can't lose weight. What's the low hanging fruit, and where do you start with them?
It's kind of funny when I first get, I feel like I'm almost a therapist. I start at the very baseline. So tell me what you do all day. How do you sit? Do you stand? How do you sleep? Do you work out? If you do work out, how many days a week do you work out? What does that look like? Do you do more cardio, or do you do, across the board? So, and if you do cardio, how long is it? I go through the whole thing. Then I'm like, okay, have you had surgeries? Do you have any injuries? Have you had any past injuries, but now you're better? How is that working for you? That's when I ask for about the inflammation. Do you have inflammation? Do you feel like is your skin can tell you a lot about inflammation. How do you feel overall? And then it's like, where do you want to be? And that's kind of where I start. And then if they're like, yeah, I'm sluggish here, I'm sluggish there, I do like berberine. I will agree with you. Berberine is a great start. I highly recommend it. I put a lot of my clients on it and suggest it, depending on their DNA. Now that I can see, when I couldn't see, or the clients I do that don't, it's kind of a little process, and I kind of can put it together and say, what are you eating, and also the way they're built and how they look and what their goal is, because everybody's different. It all looks different. It's a different puzzle almost, and until you get to the root of what's going on in that person, then I build a program around them.
Yeah, I have a similar process because, like I said at the beginning of the call, it's like we're hunters and we're gatherers, but then we've also got to avoid poisonous things. And it's like that low hanging fruit is really just the getting rid of just processed foods. It's oftentimes in the very beginning with a client, for me, it's more of a process of deletion than it is a process of addition. It's like, when they say when you're going to make a sculpture, the sculpture is already in there, but you just got to get rid of all this stuff first. All this stuff's in the way. And once we get it out of the way, we start to see the sculpture more and more. So, I do the same thing. I look at insulin, and then after that, I go ahead and I look at the actual specified macronutrient genes, right? That would predominantly be APOA2. That's for like lipid metabolism, fatty acid metabolism. And then AMY1, which is more so for starch metabolism. It's actually a salivary amylase gene. So I'll look at that then and start to just construct this person's plate for them so that it makes sense. You might have a totally suboptimal, starch gene, in which case we need to be really aware. You're not going to be the one who jumps on a typical bodybuilding diet. And when I say that, I mean chicken and rice a dozen times a day, right? Over and over again. It's probably too much, and your body will just not be able to process that level of starches, right? So we kind of look at that and steer it from there. When it comes to protein, I'm personally of the opinion that when it comes to weight loss, having a protein dominance on your plate is in your interest for a few different reasons. Number one, there's something called the thermic effect of feeding, which means it actually takes your body a certain amount of calories to deal with protein calories. So when you eat protein, you actually burn calories in order to digest the protein, which is a kind of an interesting thing. So it tips the scales a little bit in your favor. Also, when people start to go on these more calorically restricted diets, right, in order to lean out, sometimes they'll forget that you really want to do something extra to maintain lean tissue. Right? You don't want to lose a bunch of muscle mass because, yeah, the scale is going to go way down, but body composition hasn't improved, and you've probably had a longevity downside at that point as well. What's your take on that? Like, do you do the one gram per pound of lean mass, or like, what's your kind of take on protein?
I agree with you. I mean, I always push that with all my clients, protein, 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 protein. I mean, I'm just like, and I'm constantly adding it to everything. So somebody says, well, I had this for breakfast. Well, I'm like, you never eat a carb alone. I am the queen of never eat a carb alone. Your body process is totally different when it's combined with the protein. So always, yes, protein, protein. And I am the 1 gram per pound that you weigh. It's a little excessive. I know that for most women, I'm happy there. I like it there. And most people can't, most clients that I talk with, especially women, can get really pretty close to that. So I'm happy with that. I just use that as a guide mark and shoot for that.
Yeah, and a really important factor of that is that when we say 1 gram per pound of body weight, it's actually lean body weight that we're talking about, right? Like if I had a client who was, 600 pounds and obese, of course, I'm not going to suggest 600 grams of protein per day for this person. It's not necessary. And you would actually be feeding the body mass that you don't want, right? We feed the lean mass. I'll share my take on that is that I look at it kind of on a gradient. So I look at it like from, let's say, zero point 0.7 grams per pound all the way up to, if you're a real competitive athlete, like maybe 1.2, 1.25 if you're some sort of mass monster who trains twice a day or something like that. I try to offer something of a spectrum to my clients for that, because it's funny that when you say eat 1 gram per pound, a lot of people have no idea how much protein that might be. Like some people are just not really mentally ready to eat that much protein with each meal. So I give them kind of a gradient, and I might substitute some of that with something like an essential amino acid supplement. That's a great tool for recomposition because it has all of the different building blocks that your body needs as far as every amino that your body doesn't make on its own. That's what essential means. But there's no calories that come in with it. It's either going to be a capsule or a powder that you would mix up. And it gives you all the benefits of taking in protein and a positive nitrogen balance, but independent of the calories and the need to sit there and carve up yet another steak or another chicken or whatever. Is that a strategy you mess around with? Do you use amino acids?
I do, and I like amino acids. I think they're very beneficial. Another thing sometimes I use is collagen. I use a lot of collagen. It's tasteless, to get some extra protein, and it has also a lot of other benefits that I have seen that works well with that. I'm always just I am the protein girl. It's how much can I get in? But I know that you're right. Education is lacking in some people, that they just, it's just not in there. It's not their thing. And I get it. I totally understand it. And until it is a lot of protein. If you say, okay, I need 100 grams even, well, where in the world do I get 100 grams of protein? That's, they're thinking, oh my God, that's 14 chickens. And no, you don't know what you don't know. So it's an educational thing. So I like to tell people amino acids also with collagen, trying to get protein in, without having to be so consumed by the number of in the food. Because then it kind of messes with your head, right? You're like, okay, I'm trying to lose weight, but I feel like I'm eating so much food. Some people it messes with them. Some people do fine on it. Just kind of, it's a balancing. The other thing that I always look at too that we haven't discussed is the FTO gene. How satisfied are you? Some people, I am not. I'm a binge eater, which is crazy, right? Because we're very restricted as a competitor. But on a cheat meal, take me to a buffet. Oh, I people just like, where do you put it? I'm just like, it's for my head. So I really look at that gene in clients because it's very important if that person doesn't feel satisfied. So I've also found that I think that protein, it's a fuller, makes you feel more full longer. And so if you want protein, then you're not eating the rest of the other little junk, right? And it also helps with inflammation. It's a win-win to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And just piggybacking off that collagen thing as well, there's something important to say with this is that if you eat a lot of muscle meat, you really do want to balance out that amino acid profile with some collagen, because muscle meat, be it coming from chicken or steak or whatever, is pretty methionine rich. And we want to make sure that in order to support your methylation and different processes in the body, that we get a full amino acid profile. And collagen actually represents the rest of it. It's very glycine rich. So if you're going to have a lot of muscle meat to hit those protein targets, make sure that you're getting, 10 grams, 20, maybe up to 30 grams of collagen in order to kind of balance that out. We also don't want to go the other way and go tons and tons of collagen in the absence of the muscle meat, because that can actually have deleterious effects on your serotonin levels, believe it or not. Amino acids play a pretty big role in how your neurotransmitters are kind of formulated. So we don't want to have too much collagen in the absence of muscle meat, nor do we want to have the opposite. It's really important that we get a little bit of balance there. What Felicia just brought up there, the FTO gene, is really an interesting one. So there's actually two genes that we look at in your DNA 360 to do with satiety signaling. And FTO is the first one. So that one is actually, there's a signal that gets sent from your stomach to your brain when you start eating, when you start chewing down calories. And that signal can actually be slower or faster for different people. So if it's slower, which we would consider a dysregulated FTO gene, by the time that it hits your brain, you've already gone back, right? You've had a second and a third serving that your body didn't need, calorically speaking. Me too. I'm the same way. I'm actually totally dysregulated for that gene. So yeah, I mean, by the time it actually hits you, you've already overeaten, and that can play a big role. So we need to be aware of that in constructing your meal plan. Maybe you should make less amount. There's gratitude practices. There's things that you can do to help kind of get that signal up a little bit quicker. The second gene for satiety speaking is MC4R. And that one is the same idea, but it's actually at the level of the palate. So believe it or not, in your mouth, the same thing happens. There's a sense that goes up to your brain to say, okay, we're good, stop eating. And for some people, they were genetically wired to seek out, variance in their diet. So for some people, that's slow or dysregulated. So that's where we say, meal by meal, you should have a few different flavor profiles in there if you can, like a little bit of crunch, a little bit of spice, a little bit of sweet. In order to speed up that signal, get more sensory, things happening in your mouth. So that is a really important thing when it comes to making these meal plans. What are your strategies if someone is dysregulated there?
Well, I go back to okay, in fact, I usually get all my clients, send me, I want 3 days of what you eat, everything you put in your mouth before I even go anywhere. And be honest, if it's a half a cookie or if it's 10 cookies, there's no judgment. And that's where I look at it. I start there and I go down the list. And if and they're eating too much, then we go back and I'm like, okay, what times are you eating? And if you can tell me the amount, do you know the weight? Is it as big as a deck of cards, or is it a pizza, And then I go back to that. So there's a lot of times, and it's usually carbs that I have to be like, okay, we need to back off that. And the little tricks of maybe if they do have that gene of maybe drink a glass of water before we sit down to eat. There's little tricks that you can make yourself feel fuller with just water versus just sit down and gorge, which I'm guilty of. I've done it before, but and then you go, oh, and then you got the aftermath, right? You feel horrible, you're bloated, you're sluggish, you're like, why? Which sometimes sets you up for a hamster wheel effect. You start doing that over and over and over, and it creates bad things for you. So I really let's make some great new decisions, some new choices to kind of switch the habit. And it can be little things, like I said, like the water or the cutting back on the portion size or not cooking as much, or if you do cook a lot, invite friends over, right? Let's do something like that. What do you do?
So I actually follow some pretty similar principles to you. I'm also a big fan of utilizing some sort of gratitude practice surrounding your meal, and it doesn't have to be prayer. Like if you're not religious, then that's fine. Just call it universe, call it whatever you want. But I do think that it speeds the signal up a little bit to have some level of presence with the meal. There's this whole concept of eating in a parasympathetic state, right? And I'm really guilty of being the dude who paces around while I eat because I'm a little bit type A and I'm just like, let's just get this meal down so I can get on to the next client, the next, whatever. And that actually is a bad call on my part because it makes it so that I'm eating in a very sympathetic state. I'm in my head and I'm thinking about what I have to do next, to where this beautiful meal is, I'm almost disrespecting it in a way because there's people that don't have food. And here I am not even thinking about the food that I thought about it. I cooked it and all these things, but I am not present with that food. And it actually tightens up the digestive tract and you're way less like receptive to the nutrients in the meal. So there's this whole concept about taking a second, enjoying the cooking process, throwing the spices on there. Your kitchen smells good, hearing it sizzle. And then before you eat, sit down and actually just, thank the universe for a second. Like I'm aware of my food and I'm grateful for my food. Some people don't have it. I do. Thank you. And then go ahead and eat. That'll actually switch where your mind is at and make you far more receptive to the food. Other strategies that I utilize would be things like ketones. There's natural appetite suppressants that you can utilize as well, like Garcinia cambogia, if it's a real problem. So I'll use a couple of those things, but in general, it's just a matter of being logical and saying, let's not make a giant thing if it's just you home, because then you can go back to it over and over again. Let's talk a little bit about inflammation, because I think that's one of those words that's like scary and really relevant. Different types of food, your stomach will interpret as an enemy or something that needs to be attacked. And I think that it's as individualized as anything else, because I might do fine with lactose and you might not. I might do fine with lectins and you might not. What does that conversation look like for you when someone comes to you and you suspect they have like some sort of dietary source of inflammation? Like, where do you go with that?
Well, like I said, when I find out the source and then it's kind of just education. I obviously talk to them about it. Okay, look, maybe we take this product and we switch it out for something that's less more healthy, more like I used to always say, like shop on the outside of the grocery store. Let's look at the fresh stuff instead of the inside packaged things. If you can not have to pull it out of a box, I think it's going to be so much better for you. But you get those people that are like, well, I can't, it's too hard. I don't have time. I don't have, that's when we sit down and we regroup and be like, well, maybe we need to meal prep some good foods and have them for a couple of days. It's all education. It's all education. And then I'm like, and how bad do you want it? What's your why? Do your knees hurt? Do your joints hurt? Do you not sleep well? Again, how's your skin? Is it, your skin will tell you exactly if you're inflamed, and kind of make them aware and like, let's just try this. May not fix it, but let's try it. It's worth it, right? And usually 9 times out of 10, they're like, wow, okay. It was just one simple little thing. I quit eating, for me, crackers. I quit eating crackers and it really changed. You just find a different carb, right? So it's just learning the person and what they like and some people are so set in their ways and it's hard to break them. And I'm like, okay, well then let's back off. Let's go to half that amount just for a week, and sometimes you have to work backwards, like you said, right? You kind of have to start taking things away. And because some people don't want to, it's too hard to quit cold turkey. And I get it. But let's back off on it, see how you feel. And you might just be like, okay, I don't need it. And I feel better and I work better not being on it.
Yeah, and there's also, from there, once you got that part tackled, then of course we can refer to the genes, and there's a few genes of relevance with that. Like for example, in your diet report, there's a gene called MCM6. The way I remembered how that one goes is my cow's milk, because it has to do with lactose. when I was learning the genes, I was like, man, this is so baffling. So I made stupid little acronyms for a whole bunch of genes so that I would remember what they do. And that's what I arrived at for the lactose one, my cow's milk, because it's MCM6. So, and it's an interesting one, right? Because this conversation about dairy has a few moving parts to it, because some people can react to the lactose but be fine with the casein, or some people can be fine with the casein and the lactose, but the dairy fats are probably not the best call genetically. So there's a few different kind of moving parts to it, but in general, the body, for some people, after we're done on mom's milk, will continue to produce the lactase enzyme if you have the good version of the MCM6 gene. Lactose is actually the sugar found in dairy products, and some people can metabolize it far better than others. I think it's a really friggin' common source of inflammation for a lot of people. So looking at that gene is really important. There's another one that we look at for gluten, which is actually a family of genes called HLA. And it's a big family. So there's actually 7 different ones that we look at. And then the way we extrapolate it is kind of a gradient where you can be either not sensitive to gluten, or you can be all the way up to like celiac level sensitivity. Or there's one in the middle that we call non-celiac gluten sensitive, which is a general sensitivity to it, to where you're probably better off not taking it in. I personally will always bounce that off of your actual gut biome detoxification gene called GSTM1, because most things that have gluten on there also have, glyphosate and other issues in there as well. So I always look at that. And then the final gene that I look at is called FUT2, fucosyltransferase, because that can actually be an indicator of how well your body deals with lectins and other plant toxins. So it's not the same as like an actual food sensitivity test that you may want to take, but it does give you an indicator as to whether or not your body can deal with lectins. So look at all those genes, and see if that's something that's right for you or not. And then it's symptomology, like Felicia said. If I eat something that has gluten and the next day I have 4 breakouts on my face, this is a pretty good indicator that there's some inflammation, or that my body doesn't like what I just took in. So what about muscle building? That's that third category, and that's a fun one to go over. What is your approach? Let's say you have someone come to you that's more or less a beginner, but they want to know the diet component. They're like, how can I amplify my training with the best type of nutrition? What are your considerations, and what do you do there?
Well, once again, look at their food intake, protein. Let's see what they're eating. And then I depending on if they're just starting out, I start off slow. Then I add a exercise program for the diet that will keep them enough energy to complete the exercise routine or that day, and get them to the next. What I don't want is, you play with it, you start having somebody exercise, and then they're like, I am starving all the time. Well, we know why. So we go back and add more protein, look at the diet, look at the genes, and go from there. But on the flip side of that, when you talk about exercising, it's all about, is your form and reps and sets and rest and recovery, which, inflammation plays a big part also, that you can't grow unless you're rested. You can't grow unless you're eating right. So that's what I look at at the very, very beginning. It's more of, okay, what are you putting in your body? What do your genes look like? What does your body say that works best for you? And then build a program around that, especially on the carb part, right? If they're very sensitive to carbs or gluten, I look at that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, carbohydrates can be something of a double-edged sword, because they do help you to build muscle. They do tend to pull some water into the muscle. They keep your glycogen storages nice and topped off, and you tend to have more explosive power, when it comes to athletics, weightlifting. Yeah, so it's there. What I do is, let's say someone does have suboptimal starch genetics, but we want to start to incorporate a little bit of them to help with muscle building. Not that you mandatory need it, but it does help. I will usually load them up on carbohydrates surrounding a workout. Like I'll either preload them or we'll do it after, or I'll at the very least incorporate some sort of carb cycling approach where, you know, maybe once a week or something, they'll go ahead and they'll up the ante with some starch-based carbohydrates. The protein, I would say, for me is generally that constant. It's always there, but it's the other two macronutrients that I tend to manipulate a little bit more. If you happen to be totally optimal for starch metabolism, you're probably going to do okay because you can have carbs before and after your workout, and there's not going to be a gigantic metabolic downside. But if you're not optimal there, then that's when we have to introduce some sort of hybrid strategy. Like myself, I just do carb backloading. So I have one meal a day that has carbs. That's in my evening meal typically. And the rest of them are just a little bit of healthy fats, a dose of protein, and you know, some healthy fats that are naturally occurring because I just add it in. You know, I don't necessarily go way out of my way like a ketogenic diet, but I have a little bit of both because I'm kind of medium for both of those genes. What do you do currently when it comes to like your workouts? Do you do carbs any special time, or do you just kind of get them in?
Yeah, no, I'm kind of, I do my carbs at lunch, but I work out at around lunch in
Hmm.
the evening. So I try to be done with carbs after my workout for me. So I was curious when you said you do it at night. What does that look like? Is it a complex carb that you eat, and how much of it do you eat? I'm curious.
Yeah, so let me explain a little bit more about that carb backloading strategy and why I do it that way. So I want my brain to be totally on fire all day long, right? For stuff like this. So during the day, I try to operate a little bit more on fatty acids, and I'm not in ketosis, but let's call it a state of nutritional fatty acid oxidation for the most part. So I tend to rely more so on just protein and fats all throughout the day. What happens when you save your carbohydrate meal till that evening time? You dose yourself up with some carbs, your insulin goes up, and then it goes back down. And an hour or so later, you're yawning and you're ready to go to bed. So it's actually because the carbs at that point will give you a little boost of serotonin. And the serotonin will convert to melatonin a little while after that. And it's actually a strategy to spike my insulin and then lower it on purpose so that I'm tired. It helps me to sleep. A lot of people, when they do these high fat ketogenic diets and they don't load up on glucose at any point, their brain is still lit up. And a lot of people do experience sleep issues, you know, so that's where like taking some honey or something like that before bed, yeah, you might kick yourself out of ketosis, but you're probably going to get some sleep benefits. And that's, in my opinion, more important than always blowing the best millimolar on the ketone meter thing. Um, so I do that on purpose, and it's usually going to be some sort of a starch-based carbohydrate, but I'm really friggin' selective about toxins. So it's usually like an organic white rice that I've rinsed properly and I've cooked it in bone broth, and you know I've got some low lectin vegetables in there, and that's usually my last meal of the day. And then if I feel like I still need a bit, I'll have some tea or something and put some honey in there as well. Other than that, it's really just trace carbohydrates. I'll mess around with a small amount of fruit perhaps during the day if I feel like it. But yeah, I like to save it till the end. And I find that's a really hybrid approach, but I get the best of both worlds. The fat does the fat's job, and then the carbs do the carbs job, right? So let everything kind of play out that way. Have you ever messed with that carb backloading? It's a weird strategy.
Yes, but not at night, if that makes sense. No, competing, we carb load and we carb deplete. It's a whole thing. Um, and it worked very well for me, but obviously I don't like to do it long term. I didn't see results long term as far as that was only maybe in like a 12-week period, and then I don't do that. But it's interesting that I loved it when people what time they eat, what kind of food they eat, and how it affects you. Because when it affects you would not affect me the same way.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
but people don't understand. I get so many clients that are like, well, this girl, she's a stick and she just eats pizza and drinks beer all day. I'm like, okay, but she's not you. And that's not how we can't eat carbs like that. And we can't do that. But it's very interesting that you found the piece that works for you. And if that would, if everybody else could find that and they were like, oh my gosh, I know there's clients that would give anything if they could be sleepy at night, right? If they're like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I'm sleeping, or go to bed and stay asleep. That's the other thing, not wake up 10 times, like went to bed at 10, you wake up at 2 and you're like, you know. So I think it's really interesting. Carbs are very interesting. And especially if you know the difference, people think a carb's a carb, but no, complex to starch to, it's totally different across the board and how you eat it and when you eat it. So that part's really interesting to me. I love that you do that. That's cool.
Yeah, a carb is not necessarily a carb. A protein's not a protein. There's differences in quality. There's differences in function. I mean, I always quote on these webinars that to me, food is information. And I look at it as information, and that's why the calories in, calories out equation, while it's got some value, I'm not the guy that completely says that there's no value to that. At least you're measuring your food. At least you're thinking about your food. However, a food is far more complicated than the caloric content of it. There's a lot to it. And as soon as you put it in your mouth, your body now has a physics equation that it has to figure out to nutrient partition and all these different things. So food does a lot of jobs. That's what keeps our enzyme pathways going. It's what fuels our muscles, our brains, our hormones, etc. So it's way more complicated than just the actual density of it from an energy perspective. We also don't know exactly how much energy your body is expending every day. They'll tell you they do. You can put you can go on a treadmill and it'll say, oh, you burn this many calories, but your brain burns calories and your liver burns calories. And it's really difficult to know what that actual number looks like. So the idea that you can jump on a diet plan and, well, this is what I took in and this is what I burned and it's going to be neutral at the end of the day and I'm going to lose weight. I think that's missing part of it, right? That can work. I'm not saying it can't work, but we should be looking at optimal health. How do we fuel all of these processes with your nutrition? And modern day nutrition can be medicine and it can also be poison, and there's everything in between. So I think we need to have a more nuanced conversation about diet.
I agree totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really, really twisted in how education wise in our food. And this is kind of a stray subject when people say, oh, but I'm eating sugar free. I'm like, and when you made a point, well, it's sugar free until I put it in my mouth and then I digest it. And then you're right. The whole body, it it turns some of it into sugar. I mean, all those little big words at the bottom, sugar free in the box, but it's not sugar free once it gets in you. You have to be really aware of what you're putting in your body and when. And all those little things add up to big changes though. And it's nothing I think to get discouraged by. It's okay, does this gonna work? And let's try this. And is that gonna work? And let's try this until you get to the point you're like, okay, it's working. It's working. And that's what keeps you going, right? That's where you're like, and it's a process with all of us. None of us have it down. Like, you know, all the time, 24/7. But once you figure out the meat and potatoes of it, as you would say, it works,
Yeah.
right? Down, then you're like, oh, okay, my body likes this. My body responds well to this.
Yeah. And ironically, for some people, it is going to be meat and potatoes. That's,
So,
it's a saying, but I mean, that's one of those things that can actually work for a lot of people as well. We're getting to the top of the hour where we'll switch over to some Q&A. So if there's any lingering questions still, make sure you put it in the Q&A box. I actually had just one more question for you, Felicia, while people are doing that. How do you approach with your clients the difference between training days and not training days? Right? Like, do you cycle anything in there? Do you add more carbohydrates on their recovery day or on their training day? Is protein the constant and you alter the other macros? Like, what do you do for people with that?
yeah, for me, it's protein. I'm constant protein. That's where I work best. And then it's a check-in. How are you feeling today? Are you sluggish? Do you have energy? Also, I also look at their genes to see how they recover. Are you recovered? Do you feel recovered? Or are you hungry? I had a client last week. We got on our monthly call, and she's like, "I'm hungry a lot, and I feel like I need more food." I'm like, "Okay, well, let's get you some more protein. We need to get you more protein." Instead of don't describe the next snack, the little snack, you know. That's where I work. That's where I like it. But it's protein first, and then it's let's look at the next steps. Are you sluggish? Like I said, the A, B, C, and D. That's me. What about you?
I will tailor it to their genes usually because if I have them on, let's say, some sort of carb cycling approach, I'll actually usually have them carb up on their recovery day, believe it or not, just because it gives the body time to really refuel all the glycogen storages and things. I'm the same as you as far as keeping the protein at a relative constant there. I might up it by 10 grams or something on a leg day or some really, really bombastic workout. But it's fairly constant. And then I just manipulate the other two macronutrients. But I generally will actually have them carb up a bit on their recovery day, knowing that the next day is not a recovery day. So I do think that carbohydrates do have some recuperative properties for people. And if you really spend the day just making sure that we're hydrating, we're carbing up, we're getting some food in, we're getting some rest in, we're foam rolling, we're breathing, we're stretching, you're probably going to go into that next day and have a really good workout. So that's usually how I do it. And it seems to be working pretty well.
I will agree with you. If you do carb up, that usually the next day is really good. That's why if I have somebody who's a cyclist and they're the next day they're going to do a race, yeah, I'll carb up. Carb that now. Then I will be like, carb it up. Let's carb up so that you have a lot of fuel the next day, and it works really well. Do the same thing with a runner or somebody who's going to use a lot of energy for a long time. So
Yeah.
it depends on what we're training for too. What are we training for? What's the end goal? Is also how I tailor that.
Yeah, well, that matters a ton too, right? Because someone who's underweight, I'm going to have a totally different strategy than someone who's majorly overweight. So, of course, I might add a fasting element here, or if you're underweight, I'm going to say, no, we're not going to do any fasting. We're going to friggin' eat,
Right.
So I always say on these webinars that I don't treat the DNA report, I treat the person.
Right.
We use clinical correlation. We talk to the person. We do an intake with the person. We know all about their health history, what their activity levels are, injuries, etc. Then we look at the genes, and then we construct the game plan, and then we just hold the hand until they get to where they're going. So it's kind of a step-by-step thing.
Right. You're right. And at the end of the day, they do all the work, and we're just the cheerleaders, and you get them to the end, and they, you know, everything is just magnified because they did it. That's my favorite part. Like, oh my gosh, you did it. I love it.
Yeah, it's the best. All right, so let's go ahead. We've got numerous questions here to get to. So let's see. Tammy says, I have DNA testing, but don't know how to then put this into a personalized diet plan. She later says that she does have the FTO gene. I'm assuming she means dysregulation there. My advice to Tammy is to get with Miss Felicia here or myself and go over it, right? Because as we talked about, there's a bunch of moving parts to this. We want to know about gut biome. We want to know about insulin. We want to know about micronutrients. We have other genes that have to do with resting metabolic rate, like UCP1. I also like to know about just the total inflammation load on the body as well. So I like to look at the entire report before I actually recommend any kind of a diet plan. I'm guessing you do the same thing, Felicia. You kind of look the whole thing over first.
Yeah, you want to look at everything. I'm just not going to willy-nilly out there like, oh, hey, let's do this. I mean, I've done that, personally done that. So if we can get to the quickest, that's the goal, right? So that's why I love the DNA where it'll tell you exactly what to do. Now, Tammy, reach out to one of us. We'd be happy to help you break it down.
Absolutely. Okay, next question comes from Carol. Hello, Carol. She asked, what kind of essential amino acid compounds? So earlier in the call, I was talking about those essential amino acids, and it's an important distinction here because in the first place, there's essential amino acids, and then there's non-essential amino acids. Non-essential means that you can get it from wherever. Like, there's a difference between amino acids that your body makes and amino acids that your body doesn't make. So if it's essential, it means you have to get it from dietary sources or supplement sources because your body doesn't make it. And there's several of those. Glutamine is kind of in a weird gray area because there are circumstances where your body can make glutamine and there's circumstances where it doesn't make it. So glutamine is kind of a wanderer in that conversation. But there's a bunch of these amino acids that your body doesn't make and you have to get, and preferably in certain ratios. So there's a couple of companies that I think are really good. One is called MAP Aminos. Dr. Varden is on with us tonight somewhere in those comments, and she loves MAP. So those are the ones that she uses. I typically use ones from a company called Kion, Kion. And the product is just called Kion Aminos, and that's exactly what it is, an essential amino acid supplement that has scientifically researched ratios of each and every one that your body doesn't make on its own, and it operates like this Swiss Army knife. It's important to distinguish as well between EAAs and BCAAs, because BCAAs are 3 of the 9 total essential amino acids. So if you were to use a BCAA supplement as opposed to an essential amino acid supplement, you'd be missing out on a whole bunch of them. And amino acids actually have ratios and things to consider where you can actually mess up different neurotransmitters if you take in a preponderance of 3 BCAAs in the absence of the other ones. So I'm not the biggest fan of BCAA supplementation because you can run into some issues there. EAAs are better, and those would be the couple that I use. Do you have a brand or anything you use, Felicia?
I'm like, I just make sure that it's scientifically tested, that I just don't go willy-nilly buying stuff off the shelf. There's so many products out there. Just do your research. I would look at reviews, research, and just make it sure it's scientifically backed.
Gotcha. Okay, so those are all going to serve you pretty well. Carol has a second question here about collagen. So what kind of collagen? And that is interesting because there's all these types of collagen, right? There's like 5 different types of collagen or 7. 1 and 3 are the most common types of collagen that are really associated with collagenous tissue formation. And they usually just get it from exactly that, from ligaments and tendons and things of the animal. My main considerations is that it's coming from a healthy animal in the first place, right? So if I'm getting chicken collagen, then it's going to have to be from a free range pasture raised chicken, or if it's bovine collagen, it needs to be coming from grass fed sources. There's a lot of brands out there that you can go towards. I usually use like Organica is a decent brand. I happen to be a Primal Health coach, and there's a brand called Primal Kitchen that makes collagen peptides as well. And I love Primal, and I love the people over there, so I tend to use them as well. Which one do you tend to use, Felicia?
I'm going to give you credit because remember I asked you not too
I
long
remember.
ago company, and so I bought the brand that you suggested, and I'm really happy with it. And I think it's the what was the first one you named? The
Organica.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy with it.
Yeah, and just 10 grams a day for most people is enough. You don't need a ton of it, but you might want to add a little bit more if, let's say, you're working through an injury or something like that. Support those ligaments and those tendons. So I hope that helped. All right, continuing on the collagen bandwagon here because we've got some more questions. So Melissa said, collagen for protein, I was told it shouldn't count toward your protein goal because it's not a complete protein, aka doesn't have a full amino acid profile. She does take collagen peptides daily, but I was hoping for clarification on this. Okay, so yes, there is something to unpack there. This relates to the conversation about pairing it with muscle meat, right? And the balance of the amino acids there. So if you're counting grams of protein, usually you wouldn't actually count those 10 grams as a complete 10 grams. That's where I personally will usually take EAAs as well as collagen. And I just call that 10 grams of protein because I know that I'm getting the rest. But yeah, you're right that you wouldn't actually count it if you were trying to hit, let's say, 100 grams in a day and you had 90 grams that were muscle meat and 10 grams that were collagen. Technically, you didn't get a full 100 grams of protein in there. At that point, I would say there is a little bit of hair splitting taking place. You're probably still going to recover very well. If you're concerned about it, what I would do is I would just add in a scoop or even a half scoop of essential amino acids, and that covers the rest of the profile nicely. But it's a great addition, and we want to make sure, like I mentioned, that we have that balance between the two so that it doesn't mess with our neurotransmitters. And we also don't want strictly muscle meat because your methionine can be a little bit out of hand, and it can cause elevated inflammation and things with homocysteine. Anything to add to that, Felicia?
You nailed it. That was great.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, and it's a perfectly good question because yes, it is a protein technically, but like we said, not all protein is created equal. It all has different profiles, and the profile is what matters. So great question. Okay, so Trudy has a question. Holy, she's got her whole report loaded up here. So what advice can you give me for the plate and exercise? Okay, so dysregulated hunger. The insulin is good, not very good for carbs, good for fats, fair enough. And a little bit dysregulated when it comes to these satiety signals. So what I would recommend right off the bat is a coaching program, no doubt about it, because we can really dive a little bit deeper than we can on a call like this. But in general, I would say that you're going to want to be set up for a little bit more of a protein and fats diet. I would be a little bit careful with messing around with any starches when you have the AA version of the AMI1 gene. Not all carbs are starches, right? So you could technically use, if you needed some additional glucose, you could go towards maybe some fruit, maybe some honey, maybe some, I don't know, maple syrup, something that's got some glucose in there. Also, bear in mind that your body can use protein to get glucose if it needs, right? So there's something called the gluconeogenic pathways, which basically means if you go overboard a little bit on your protein, some of it will convert to glucose and you'll be fine there. Like your body can make glucose and it can get it from things like protein. What I would say is when it comes to starches, though, you're going to want to pretty much save those for special occasions. And other than that, maybe get your carbohydrate sources from something that is not starchy. Or you could use something called an amylase enzyme, right? So there's actually digestive enzymes that you can throw in if you want to go ahead and try to up your ability to metabolize starches. What I would do as well is consider the timing if you want to add in some starches. You could do it post-workout, and there's more like sensitivity there at that point. So you're probably going to have less metabolic downside if you take it in post-workout. When it comes to the satiety signals, it's exactly what Felicia and I mentioned. You know, you can use blood glucose disposal agents, you can use ketones, you can use Garcinia cambogia, a prayer or a gratitude practice, and a lot of different flavor profiles per meal. That'll help accelerate those signals. And when it comes to the last gene you mentioned there, SOD2, I wouldn't do a heck of a lot of cardio when you don't have very good mitochondrial detox. So that's what that gene's for, clearing the free radicals away that get created during especially cardiovascular exercise. But once again, a coaching program is your best bet because then we can get super duper deep into the weeds. Anything to add to that, Felicia?
Oh, yeah, Trudy, this is where Justin and I would really deep dive into like, okay, how tall are you? What do you weigh? What does a day look like for you? How much cardio do you do? You work out? When do you eat? What do you eat? There's a lot of little questions that I would ask. We would love, Justin, I would love to help you. So if you're interested, because I also looking at the gene, yeah, it takes longer for you to recover. That would be the biggies. Like, how much cardio are you doing, or what are you doing? So there's a lot of little questions, but great. That's great, and we'd love to jump on there and help you achieve your goals.
Absolutely. So we'll see you in one of our coaching programs, perhaps. Okay, so moving along here, we're down to the last few. So Christine says she has the GG version of the TCF7L2. That's the insulin response gene that we mentioned. So it's the optimal version is GG. The T allele, whether it's a single T or if they're both T's, is suboptimal. So what does that mean and how do you compensate? So once again, that would be to do with, it's going to complexify the macronutrients, right? Because I look at that first, even if you have optimal APOA2 and you have optimal AMY1, but that TCF7L2 is dysregulated, you can still end up with your insulin going up and down more frequently than you might like. Remembering that insulin is a storage hormone and it can cause additional weight gain if we're not careful. My number one recommendation is a coaching program. Once again, I hate to keep on saying that, but that's what that's for. As a baseline recommendation, I think what Felicia and I talked about the protein prioritization is probably your best bet there. That's going to have the least likelihood of creating an insulin spike for you. And insulin is not evil either, right? There's a time and a place for it to go up and down. We just don't want dysregulation. We don't want it out of your control. We want it in your control. So prioritize protein, maybe a little bit of intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating could be in your interest. And then apple cider vinegar, berberine, Ceylon cinnamon, different things to help control your blood sugar, which isn't the same exact thing as insulin, but it's still good to know. Those would be the main strategies. You can use a continuous glucose monitor and monitor the quality of your food as well. Those would be your best bets. Then just go ahead and get in a coaching program because, of course, we can look at all the remainder of that. Anything to add on that one?
No, I was going to say the glucose monitor if you want to get that specific, but if you're not real sure how to read those numbers or what to do with the numbers, then yes, a coaching program is where I would direct you, because you don't want a number and then be like, I don't know what I'm doing with it or what does that mean? So education is very important.
Yeah, definitely. I'll quickly answer Florence's here because she's just got a single concept question. What's the gene for insulin resistance and needing berberine? It was the one that was just mentioned there, TCF7L2. If you have your DNA 360, it's either in your diet report or your cardiovascular report, and that will be the one. More collagen questions. We are talking about collagen a lot today, so it's a good thing. Is marine collagen okay to use? This is a question from Joanna. Instead of mammal-based collagen. In my opinion, I don't see anything wrong with that. Anything to do with seafood, I always just have to be a little bit aware of the sourcing. We know what we've done to the oceans, and sea life has been affected by that, unfortunately. But if it's a trustworthy source and you think it's clean, it's still coming from collagenous tissues, right? And skin and different things that are going to do effectively the same thing for you. Personally, I've always mixed it up a little bit. I have used marine collagen. I have used bovine collagen. I have used chicken collagen. I have used egg collagen. There's a lot of foods that have collagen in there. So just use whatever works for you. Honestly, if you found a good source, I don't see anything wrong with that. Let's see. So Carol has a question. MCAS and high histamine people do not do well with the probiotics in fermented foods. Yes, so histamine is its own issue, right? When it comes to inflammation at the level of the gut, there's these enzymes called DAO. They create histamines, and you're going to be a lot more sensitive if you're really prone to histamines to a lot of these other foods. And you're right, it can make it difficult for probiotics to colonize. There's no real question on that one, so I'm just kind of waxing poetic about that. There's a product that I found extremely interesting when it comes to histamines. It's called HistaResist from a company called Level Up Health, LVLUP Health. And it's got things to counteract the DAO enzyme. It has certain things that basically improve your body's ability to deal with histamines. And some people, when they attack that problem first, and there's usually some other dysbiosis going on there as well in the gut. But if you can tackle that, then later on, you may be able to utilize probiotics and fermented foods, etc. But yes, that's a difficult one because too many histamines will certainly cause a lot of inflammation at the level of the gut. So something to be aware of. But check that product out because it's got a lot of cool science that went into it. Okay, so we got a question here about plant-based diets. So how do you recommend vegans get enough protein besides adding protein shakes? Wouldn't protein shakes increase mucose, acidity, and inflammation to the system? Okay, so there's a bunch of moving parts to this because in general, when it comes to plant-based proteins, a lot of people do have some issues actually digesting them and getting the amino acids out of the proteins. So one thing that I would suggest is paying attention to the amount of proteolytic enzymes that you're taking in. Sometimes when we add more enzymes like protease, your body can actually get more out of the protein that you are eating, because that's the main thing that actually metabolizes it and changes it around to get the requisite amino acids out of your protein that you're consuming. Adding shakes can be a successful tool, but you're right, it can certainly cause more problems than good, because it can cause inflammation if you don't digest that type of protein. And I would imagine, being on a vegan diet, you're not utilizing whey protein or some of these other more animal source proteins. So what I would recommend is paying attention to your protease, trying to get some extra enzymes in. Make sure you have enough hydrochloric acid as well. HCl is important for protein breakdown. Then you may want to consider just utilizing the essential amino acids that we talked about. A lot of those do come from plant sources, and you've already got it in a broken down state, if that makes sense. It's the micronutrient within the macronutrient that is protein. So all that work is already done. It's already in an instantized form, and you're taking in the aminos separate from the protein itself. So that would be one of the main areas that I would go towards. You have anything to add to that, Felicia?
I was going to say aminos. That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, it's complicated, right? And once again, I would want to know all of your genes as to whether or not plant-based is totally appropriate, and treat the person as opposed to the paper. But yeah, check out the essential aminos. MAP and Keon are both really good brands for that one. Okay, here we go. So Lisa has a question about dairy, which we talked about a little bit. She says, do we have an immediate reaction to dairy, or is it downstream impact? So most people, it's going to be pretty immediate, because you'll find people that are really reactive to dairy. Some of them end up in the bathroom within hours of ingestion. I think it's more of a spectrum, and it's more about where you are on that level of reactivity. For some people, it might be 2 days later, a couple of zits on their face. But for some people, it's pretty much diarrhea within the hour, right? So it's very personalized. And like I mentioned earlier in the call, it may be the lactose, it may be the casein. There's a big difference between A2 dairy and A1 dairy. Is it fermented dairy, like a yogurt, versus just drinking milk? That can really make a big difference, because fermentation tends to take away some of the reactive compounds. Was it taken with lactase in there or without it? So there's a few moving parts to dairy. I would recommend some experimentation on that one, but you'll know if you have a very serious reactive component to that. You may need an EpiPen, because you'll feel it right away. Felicia, what are your thoughts on that?
I was curious if Lisa has that problem. It sounds like it's a basic question. Do we have an immediate reaction to dairy? I was curious if she did. I was wondering, what has she tried other milks? Has she tried there's so many out there now. I mean, it's endless. It's just crazy. And maybe worked backwards, or tried one, see what the next day happens, tried another one, or didn't. It's kind of a experimental, right? At that point, you're going to have to be experimental and see what works and doesn't work.
Yeah. And look at the genes, because if it's, once again, my cow's milk, if it's the MCM6 gene, that's more specific to lactose than it is the rest of the equation. So it could be just lactose on its own, in which case either get lactose-free versions of stuff, or just have your own lactase enzyme on hand. Usually if it's lactose-free, it means that they included the lactase enzyme in its preparation. So the enzyme actually went in and ate away all the lactose, and then there you go. You've got the dairy removed from that particular reactive component. But I know a lot of people that are more so allergic to the casein component as well. So again, it's knowing what you're reactive to and what you're not. But good question. Thank you. Okay, so we got another question here about that GSTM1 gene, right? The gut detox, very important gene. I have suboptimal profile for GSTM1, but an average response to gluten. This is a good question. Would eating organic gluten grains be a good choice, or should I avoid gluten totally? So gluten, there's a lot to it, right? Because most things that contain gluten are also heavily sprayed with pesticides. A lot of these foods tend to be higher FODMAP, and FODMAP is like something that causes like gas and bloating and things in people. So sometimes it's just the FODMAP element that people react to. In my view, if you have suboptimal GSTM1, you should probably be aware of most gluten, but if it's organic, it may be better quality and you may not be super reactive to that part. The problem is the term organic doesn't have a lot of real specifications behind it modern day. So like they may have used organic pesticides on there, and yay, it's still organic, but there's pesticides on there. You know what I mean? So organic can be a little bit buzzwordy, and you have to be pretty careful with that. What I would recommend is the low-hanging fruit of the quality of the food in the first place. So like, for example, if it's oatmeal that you want to eat, you can get a sprouted version of that, right? And sprouting tends to take away some of these compounds. You can soak things. You can do a lot to get rid of some of the more reactive components to it. You can soak things in vinegar or baking soda in case there was some pesticides put on there. Then it's a matter of the dosage can make the poison. A little bowl versus 3 servings in a day can make a big difference when it comes to that reactivity. But if you trust that source and it's real food and you generally eat a clean diet and you support your microbiome with other stuff, we can override a GSTM1 gene because you do have a decent gluten response. And I would consider it an inclusion food, but be a little bit careful with it. You can't trust terms like organic as much as we would hope you could. What do you think about that one, Felicia?
Great. I agree with you. That was good. You're killing me. That's good. Good answer.
These are all nuanced questions. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things.
Yeah,
Here's a good one for you. Is muscle weight, total body weight? Hold on, the thing moved on me. Is muscle weight total body weight minus the weight of bones and fat? So I think that this question is in reference to lean body mass versus total body mass, like we talked about. What do you think about that?
yeah. I think you weigh so it's separate. Like you weigh this amount, but this amount. So I have a scale. It'll tell me exactly. I weigh this, and then it says this much. It says then I'm I must be honest. I'll be transparent here. I have a scale that says I weigh 139, and then it says I have 114 pounds of muscle. So yeah, they're totally separate because you have to include your organs. They weigh. You have body weight or water weight that adds pounds. You have all these factors that weigh. So yes, if I'm reading it right, muscle weight is totally different than body weight. Do you agree, Justin?
I agree. Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, we don't want to feed total body mass, right? We want to find what that lean number looks like. So you got to know what your total body weight is, and then you got to know what your lean body mass is, and base everything off that second number. You know what I
Right.
mean? So that's really important for protein ratios and different things. There's certain types of scans that you can do as well, where you like immerse your body in water. Even at some gyms, I've seen that they do have them to just know. And you can also go old school and use the calipers. Have you ever used those?
Yes, back in the day, I have used them. Have you ever had a DECA scan?
I've never had it done, but I think it's pretty accurate as far as that's concerned.
And you actually lay in there, and it comes all the way down your body, but it gives you a full printout reading of your muscle. It also tells your bone density, so which is so cool in bodybuilding or being active, and for older women, it'll tell you your bone density. It'll even show you your fat mass, muscle mass, It's a phenomenal rating. And they print it out, and then you can go back. Say you exercise for 6 months, you can go back and do it again, and it'll reread you and tell you everything. Pretty spot on. Pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. And that's so good to know. And even knowing your bone density is like, I think, a pretty important metric for healthy aging too. So it's a good one.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Here in Texas, they actually travel around. You can actually find them at different spots. They have traveling DECA scans or a walk-in store.
Beauty. All right. So we got time for a couple more. Is there anything on here that you were itching to answer?
What do you think about Florence's? Are vegan protein powders good to get additional protein with almond milk?
So I'll be careful with how I word it, just because I don't want to say there's no value to vegan proteins. You can get protein from plant sources. It's just that, in my experience, and I actually did sell supplements for like 5 years. I was in the supplement industry as well. Yeah, another lifetime ago, back in the day. And I'll say that as far as returned items, people would buy a protein and then return it. There was definitely more vegan ones that got returned than any other type of protein that we sold, due to reactivity. People would be like, I took this and my gut didn't feel particularly good on it. Like, can I get my money back? And I'd be like, all right, here's a gift card. But so that's my only real problem with it, is that a lot of people tend to be reactive at the level of the gut to the vegan based protein powders. I think that they can still work, especially if your gut microbiome is actually functioning properly. But in my opinion, right now, the research favors animal protein when it comes to things like muscle building, bioavailability, etc. And a lot of people have GI issues when it comes to, soy-based protein, pea proteins, brown rice proteins. So I favor trying to get more animal sources, and that could be egg protein, that could be whey. You can get a lot of different types. Collagen's an animal protein. So again, the essential amino acids, a lot of those you can get from plant sources, and there's less reactivity. But I've seen plenty of problems with the plant ones, so I don't personally recommend them. What about you? Have you ever taken them? Like, is that something that you're a fan of, or no?
No, I've never taken them. I can honestly say I've never done that.
Yeah.
And never even had a desire to try that. But I'm always curious about a lot of stuff. But that's one area I've never ventured off into, as far as taking that.
Yeah. But it's your choice. So if you want to take it, you have my blessing. It's just not a recommendation I make. Okay, I'll answer one more here, just because we're coming to the halfway point of the hour. So let's see. Deborah has a question that's interesting. So, is there a way to get the benefits of exogenous ketones for brain health and neurotransmitter balance without being in ketosis? So, I'm going to assume here that you mean nutritional ketosis, like without having to do all the stuff associated with getting into ketosis in that way, being carbohydrate restriction, a ton of fasting, that kind of a thing. And yeah, I mean, you use the word exogenous there. You can certainly use exogenous ketones to get the brain boosting benefits of ketones without having to actually get yourself into ketosis. And when I say that, I mean, you could use ketones, but still eat. You could even eat carbohydrates and still get those cognitive benefits. But you don't have to restrict or add a bunch of fats in or do a 3-day fast or whatever. So yeah, I mean, you can get those with exogenous ketones. And now there's a lot of different sources, right? You can use anything from a caprylic acid, which is like a C8 or a C10 MCT. You could use BHB, which is beta hydroxybutyrate, or the one that I'm a big fan of is an R13 butane ketone ester from a company called HVMN. It's called Ketone IQ, and it comes with an actual shot glass, and you take it and it tastes awful. And your body has all of these bioavailable ketones. It raises it to levels way above what you would get from a beta hydroxybutyrate, etc. And it puts you into that state pretty quickly. And the only way you would actually get the same level of ketones for your brain would be from doing like a 3-day fast or excessive restriction of carbohydrates as well as protein. So that's the one that I recommend. That's actually my pre-webinar thing that I do. I take a shot of those ketones prior. And that's the source that you do. And it's got a ton of benefits to the brain as well as to the metabolism. Also, it has appetite suppressing effects. So any of you that have that dysregulation of FTO or MC4R, ketone esters are a great option. Anything to add to that before we wrap up, Felicia?
That was very interesting. Did you do that today?
I did. Right here. Ketone IQ shot.
Love it. Love it. Love it.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming and participating today. These conversations are always so much fun, and I feel like we always only scratch the surface. You know, we may have to do a part 2 to this one because there's so much to break down. But thanks, Felicia, for rolling up on this one. I enjoy talking to you as always, and thank you everybody for showing up. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be here. So your continued interest is always amazing.
Thank you, Justin. It was a great time. I loved every minute of it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Signing off from the DNA Company, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, team. Excellent job, everybody. Thanks for coming.